Stave churches were a type of wooden Christian churches once common in Scandinavia. They were mostly built in the period from 1050 to 1350, so from the mid-11th to the mid-14th centuries. These churches were entirely constructed from wood, with wooden joints instead of any metal elements. There was almost 2,000 of these churches built across Scandinavia in the Middle Ages, but unfortunately only about 30 of them survived to this day. Now, most of them are located in Norway, but this one is actually located in Karpacz in Poland, to where it was relocated in the 19th century, so I'm lucky enough to actually be able to visit it myself and show you everything. Now, the name Stave Church refers to the way they were constructed. You see, earlier in the Viking Age, the so-called palisade churches were built. The way you build a palisade church is very simple, actually. You just take a log, you split it in two halves, and then you put these into the ground next to each other to form a wall. Then you put roof on top of that, and voila, there's your church. So they are very easy to build, but they were also very susceptible to decay. Therefore, later, they improved that by building the so-called post churches. Now, the difference was that now most of the wall was rested on a stone or wooden sill, isolating the wall from the ground, and only the corner posts were actually driven into the ground to support the construction. However, these walls also deteriorated over time. As a matter of fact, there are no palisade or post churches that survive to this day. That's why the stave churches were invented in the 11th century. Now the whole wall, together even with the corner posts, was rested on a stone sill. That's the secret why they were so durable. Now, if you look up the other churches, you might see that some of them are actually black. That's because they originally were covered in tar for protection against moisture and rot. The roof was covered using wood shingles and was always constructed at an acute angle to prevent snow from accumulating on top and causing damage to the building. Stave churches were usually quite little, in fact often significantly smaller than this one, since the communities were just very small back then. But the real question is, why were these churches so different to what was built in the rest of Europe at the time? The Norsemen, even in the previous period, in the Viking Age, were incredibly skilled craftsmen when it comes to woodworking, with the greatest achievement being, of course, the famous Viking ships. Now, at the time these churches were being erected, the Viking era was already over, but you can see that the craftsmanship was passed down on the next generations. Also, these churches show us something absolutely fascinating. They were clearly built as Catholic temples, but at the same time we can see the great influence of the earlier Scandinavian folklore and Norse mythology in the theme and the decorations. For example, on top of the roofs, apart from Christian crosses, representations of dragon heads were also very common. The portal of the church was often richly decorated with, again, Norse-style floral carvings. Note this creature here. There's actually two of them on both sides of the door. These are the so-called Norse lions, which are supposed to guard the entrance to the building. That was also a very popular practice. We actually do see them carved next to the door in several of the stave churches in Norway. Inside, the larger stave churches, like this one, contain quite a few freestanding columns supporting the roof. During the long Scandinavian winters, it was apparently very cold inside these churches, since there was no form of heating. So if you were going to a mass during the winter in medieval Scandinavia, you had to remember to dress really warmly. Probably you would have to put on at least a couple of tunics. Just imagine all of those people gathered together in this little church, everyone in the tunics and hoods, singing or praying together. Imagine the atmosphere there. It must have been a truly spectacular sight. Keep in mind though, that in the Middle Ages masses were conducted in Latin, so unfortunately people would often not understand that much. Interestingly enough, originally there was also no benches, except for one at the back for the old, so most people had to stand throughout the whole mass. Another interesting thing to consider is that stave churches were originally very dark inside, as there was almost no windows in the walls. The ones we do see in this church were added during the modern renovation. Back then, the only sources of light in the whole church were these small circular holes shading a bit of light on the nave and candles lighting up inside. In the second, inner portal, we can see some more beautiful period carvings. Once again, we can spot the traditional Norse symbols, such as vine, dragons, and actually, some Norsemen. Sometimes, some short inscriptions in the runic alphabet were also included. Usually, around the church, a small passage was built. It's the section with the lowest part of the roof on top. Now, these passages had many different functions, but the main aim was actually to just protect the actual wall of the church from the elements and the weather conditions, because it's always easier to replace part of the passage than to repair the actual wall of the church. Stave churches provide us with an important link between Viking and Christian culture. They are a product of a unique fusion of the two religions not seen in any other region.